Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Hawk's Nest. Seahawks beat the Steelers. Let's get into it. Well, the Seahawks this week went into Pittsburgh and got a huge early season win. This was one of those games when you saw it on the calendar in the offseason, you thought, oof, 10 a.m. start time, Pittsburgh. A lot of Pittsburgh's got something to prove this year. That might be a tough game. Instead, Seattle's come out with a win, starting off 2-0 for the first time since that Super Bowl season back in 2013. They looked great, both the defense and offense. Certainly, Russell Wilson was a little bit above the rest, I think, in the respect of he just looked amazing. He was great in his pre-snap recognitions of the blitzes. He was accurate. He was quick with the ball. He made timely decisions. I've always kind of thought in the back of my head, and this has been more leading up to 2013, 2014, 2015 Russell Wilson. And what I always thought was that he's a great quarterback post-snap. He knows he can make something out of nothing. He's a magician, right? But I always thought that the place he kind of struggled in was pre-snap. It always seemed like he struggled to recognize when the blitzes were coming or how it was coming at him. And I've watched him over the last couple of years get better and better and better at recognizing where it's coming from. And a lot of that recognition is going to come in the form of him making those quick passes. When you see him getting rid of the ball in 1.88 seconds, which I think was a few of the timed throws that he had in this game, that is nowhere near what you would see from Russell in 2014 and 2015, where he would always fall back on that ability to scramble and get out of trouble. Now he's sinking into his reads and he's trusting his reads. He's trusting what the pre-snap is telling him, and he's going where he should go with the football. This is very important because it's going to make the game easier on Russell Wilson. He's not going to have to be a hero on every play if he can make the simple short throw that's going to be there when defenses allow themselves to be exposed on the back half. So awesome of Russell to take that next step forward. Also great to see the coaching staff trusting Russell. We saw him only throw 20 times in that first game. Certainly some of that was the Hawks coaching staff holding the cards close to the vest, but they let Russell go out to 35 times in this game, gave him 16 more attempts, and he made the most of it. I think he completed 25 balls, including an absolute money shot to DK Metcalf on a very key 4th and 1. Sort of shades of that David Moore play at Carolina from last year. So a fantastic victory for Seattle, a huge win, make no mistake about it, even though it's early season, going out on the road into Pittsburgh, 10 a.m., big time victory. So something to get excited for, and most importantly, isn't it awesome to watch a Hall of Fame quarterback in the middle of his prime do his thing? It's a treat. Appreciate it. You don't get this much.
Hey, fellas, listen up. First of all, it's Coach's birthday, 68. Birthday. It's his 100th win with the Seahawks, baby.
Next topic I want to dive into was good fortune. Now, getting to the Super Bowl, you got to have a lot of things. You got to have a franchise quarterback. You have to have a left tackle that can pass protect. You have to have a defense that's at least decent enough to hold the water for an offense if what you're leaning on is a spectacular offense, a la the Chiefs, let's say. But you also need one other little component. Some might call it good luck. Some might call it a blessing. But I just call it, let's say, good fortune. And that is, we've seen great teams in the past of the Seahawks. This was especially true under Mike Holmgren, where you'd have great teams coming out of the offseason, looks like Super Bowl contending teams, and then the injuries would begin to set in. This guy goes, and that guy goes, and that guy goes. And suddenly, the starting team looks nothing like the team that started out the season. And your talent level has dropped so woefully that you can't overcome it, even with a Hall of Fame Russell Wilson at the helm. So it is nice to see that under that good fortune meter, as we look at this early season, that the Seahawks are actually doing pretty well. We've had no season-ending injuries. The injuries that we have had, guys are going to be able to come back for, so that's encouraging. We certainly are not at full strength, but we are looking like we'll build to full strength. While as you look conversely, Pittsburg Steelers lose their quarterback for the season. And then the Saints as well also lose their quarterback. And I'm going to wind this into the respect of this week. Seattle gets the good fortune of having not had to play Ben Roethlisberger despite being in Pittsburgh. Now we're going to get the good fortune of being able to play Teddy Bridgewater instead of Drew Brees when they come in to play Seattle this week at CenturyLink. This is the good fortune you need to get yourself in that territory of being able to get the first round bye, which I think we would all agree is probably very imperative to Seattle having those hopes of reaching the Super Bowl. We've already seen how hard it is to go on the road and win multiple games on the road in the playoffs to get there. So a real big key here for Seattle to get to that mountaintop again is to get that first round bye. And you get that by being good, yes, but also having a little bit of luck on your hand isn't bad either. And the Saints lost not only their starting quarterback, but they lost their starting middle linebacker for the season. The quarterback of your offense and the quarterback of your defense, and then you get to play them the very next week. It's not a bad time to be a Seahawks fan. Now I want to talk a little bit about Rashad Penny quickly. He's had a lot of people out there that have been haters on him. They see Chris Carson and how hard he runs, and they want to knock Rashad Penny and say, why aren't you as good as him? And I think in this last game, Rashad Penny showed a lot of the Seahawks fans why you should maybe be hesitant to have that opinion. Rashad's a great back. Is he a first-round talent back? I don't know. That's for somebody else to debate. But what he is he gives you a different skill set than from what Chris Carson gives you. Chris Carson is more Marshawn Lynch. Rashad Penny's more Sean Alexander. And what I want to say with this is that great running teams have a little bit of both, right? The Thunder and Lightning in Tennessee a couple of years ago when you had Lindale White and Chris Johnson. You see it where you get a great back and then another back that's got a bit of a different skill set and you can mix and match them. Add in a guy like CJ Prosise who would be an able pass catcher as a third down back. And you've got a nice little stable of running backs with a myriad of skills. You don't just want this one type of back because you're going to get different defenses that are going to be vulnerable to different type of running backs. Maybe a hard charging back like Carson doesn't do as well against a team that has a tendency to get hit on big running plays like Rashad Penny can do. And certainly on that big run late in that second half that you saw Penny do where he made that run happen. He, as he had noted to a reporter, had made an adjustment where the defense had played him that exact same way prior where they had crashed down into the middle of the offense, and he knew to make the adjustment into the second half where he was going to make a move, cut out to the outside, and then use that great burst because make no mistake about it, he has an upper level burst. That burst can get him out, and that's what allows him to get those 40, 50-yard runs. Chris Carson doesn't have that same burst. So again, give this guy some time. He averaged 4.9 yards per carry last season. He had a great game in the playoffs against the Cowboys. For those out there that are looking to just label this guy as a bust, I think you're doing it because it's what you want to do and you're angry about the Hawks taking a first-round running back. And I may agree with you on that. I don't think you should take running backs in the first round, but don't doubt the guy's talent. He's got a lot of it. And as this year goes by, he's going to be an integral piece of this running game and us being a successful rushing attack.
What's up, Seattle? We're bringing that win back. Hard-fought victory on the road. You know what it is. Go Hawks.
Has Metcalf not been a revelation? I thought even in my best case scenario, this guy was going to be about an 800-yard receiver with 6 touchdowns in his first year and a load of potential for down the road. But he seems to be ready to tap into that right now from the get-go. This guy has been much better than advertised. And all the detractions that we were told, he can't run the route tree. He might have some questionable hands. He's put those all to rest in my estimation. Sure, Russell's targeted him quite a bit, but he's also on pace right now for 1,200 yards. And you've watched him make catches out of a myriad of different routes. He's run the comebacks, he's run the digs, he's run the slant routes. That first catch, I mean, make no mistake about the bomb, which was a great catch in its own respect, but that first catch where he's falling away and he's got to reach back and grab the ball from an odd angle, it shows off his catch radius, it shows off his hands. He's a very competitive receiver. This guy is going to be an absolute phenomenal fit for years to come. And I've always maintained if we could just get Russell with a big-bodied wide receiver. He's just never had it. We've always had these small guys, and I've wanted for years to see us go get this guy. And the reason was because I always thought Russell throws such a beautiful deep ball, and not in just the respect that he can throw it far, not just in the respect that he can throw it high, and not just in the respect that he can throw it accurately, but in the respect of He throws it comes down like a pillow into the receiver's hands. It's just very, very catchable. And you saw this really, really on display on that 4th and 1 bomb. Notice how the ball first comes in and initially Metcalf kind of bobbles it. It's not because it was a bad throw or it was off. It was in a little bit of an odd angle as he's coming in. It was off shoulder and he bobbles it. But because the ball's coming in so softly, he's able to sort of tip it back into his hands, gain possession, get his feet down, and get the touchdown. I think you're going to see this type of thing between Russell and DK as we move forward, because anytime that we've had a good big-bodied receiver outside of Brandon Marshall who had a fork stuck in him the second he arrived into town, but even guys that were on their way out of the league like Braylon Edwards, like we saw with Williams in the Super Bowl in that one flash game against the Patriots, when you give him a big-bodied wide receiver, he's going to be able to find him. And Pete Carroll noted this week on his radio show, and I think it's an important point. When quarterbacks see those big-bodied wide receivers out there, it's just easier to throw to them. It's just something from a mental aspect of looking out and seeing this big guy that even if there's a guy next to him, they're going to feel like they're open. They're going to feel like they can make those trust throws that they don't necessarily think they can make when you've got a smaller receiver out there. So again, this is just going to be a common theme throughout this episode, but be excited. The sky looks like the limit between these two, and that's going to make this offense so tremendously dynamic. I don't even know where to begin.
I feel good always when you get a win on the road in somebody else's backyard. For us to come on the road, and I don't care how I look, we got the job done. We got a win on the road. It's good. We're 2-0 now.
So usually we reach this time of the season and there's no more hot stove league talk. All the rosterbation is done. You can do all the daydreaming you want about a last second player acquisition, but your pretty much best bet's going to be to get a street free agent if you happen to develop some major hole on your team. But what we've seen with the NFL over the last couple of years is a growing trend. Teams are a lot quicker to sort of bail out on the season and realize they're not a winning ball club. It could be the specter of the Patriots just hanging over everybody, but teams are pulling the trigger very quickly on offloading talent that might be in the last year of their contract that they don't want to re-sign, or it could be a disgruntled player that just doesn't want to be there, and so they're just going to try to turn around and get what assets they can. But it's been going in full swing. And as this concerns the Seahawks is in this respect, John Snyder is renowned for being in on every single deal. He loves to see what's out there and see if they might have a way of kind of elbowing their way in to making a deal happen. You saw them do it recently with Jadeveon Clowney. And they were also on the deal recently for this Minka Patrick, a cornerback, free safety hybrid coming out of Miami, who was just recently traded to the Pittsburg Steelers. Now, I'm glad to hear that the Seahawks were in on these trade talks, but I'm also glad to hear that they didn't make the trade, as the final basic value of this is going to be that the Steelers had to give up a first-round pick for this guy. And when you're getting a guy like that and you're getting him mid-season, and granted he has a couple years of club control with his contract, but you're not really getting the maximum value out of that as opposed to what you could have gotten for that first-round pick. It's a bit of a head-scratcher to me why the Steelers would go make this move, especially having just lost Roethlisberger. But regardless, it's great to see that Snyder was in on this deal and at least trying to work that phone line and work some kind of maneuver. It would have been interesting to see where they aligned Fitzpatrick in this defense, because if you go and move him out at free safety and then you move McDougal over to strong safety, it's basically you're admitting at that point that Marquise Blair isn't going to see the field this season unless there's an injury. I would have probably thought that they probably went with more of a nickel corner role / moved him into a starting role, but we'll never know. He's a Steeler. They wanted to overpay, so let him have it. Where I will move this forward, though, is on Jalen Ramsey. A lot of Seahawks fans want to see the Seattle bring in Jalen Ramsey. This is not going to probably happen. And the reason for this is a couple-fold. Number one, the guy has a personality that very closely matches Richard Sherman. And not that I want to hate on Richard Sherman, but I think part of the turnaround in the season for Seattle has been turning around the culture of that locker room. It's no more me first, it's team first. And built within that is not bringing in players that are going to upset the cart, that are going to just stay in line and do with what everybody else is doing. And I don't get the feeling that Jalen Ramsey is that kind of guy. He seems sort of like a brand player. I need to get my brand as big as I can so I can maximize my value. And there's nothing wrong with that. I just don't know that I see a fit for on the team. And as far as schematically, yes, he is playing in a defense in Jacksonville that is very similar to what Seattle played. And yes, Gus Bradley, when he was defensive coordinator, oversaw drafting Ramsey over there at Jacksonville. But one of the reasons that Ramsey's so upset and angry at Jacksonville is the fact that he's playing too much zone. He wants to play man on man. He wants to cover the best receiver so he can prove to everyone that he's the best cornerback in the game. Well, I'm sorry, you come to Seattle, you're not going to be playing a high prevalence of man-to-man. We're a zone team. That's just the way it's set up. And it's why, as well, I don't really want to make this type of deal, because I think there's two positions on this team that we can get away with potentially not having to use higher draft picks on that. And that's running back and that's cornerback. And there are different reasons for this. The running back being that's just what the value is in the NFL. It's being devalued more and more because you can go find these guys in the fifth, sixth, seventh round that are great running backs. Now, you can find great running backs in the early rounds as well, but if you can get another player there and get a comparable running back in the fifth or sixth round, why not go that route instead? And we look no further than a guy like Chris Carson on our own team, who cannot yet be unseated by Rashad Penny, even though Penny was the first round pick. Now, I'm not knocking Penny because I just upped him earlier in this episode, but the point still stands that cornerback is also similar to running back in that respect. Our system, we run a lot of cover 3. Essentially, a lot of the times we ask our cornerbacks to just drop straight back into zone. You just need to cover the deep side of the field, not give up a big play, keep everything in front of you, and then we allow our linebackers to handle those underneath zones. Now, bringing in a cornerback who's as gifted and great as Ramsey, and certainly would be an upgrade, and you'd see a little bit better coverage, but because he's stuck within the system of playing that zone coverage, his impact's a little bit minimized. And I don't see a reason for overpaying for that type of value when you're doing just fine over there with what you've got. Certainly we could maybe get a little bit better, but at the end of the day, I don't want to give a first-round pickup for a guy like Ramsey. That would be a short-term solution, and I don't think we want to pay him either, which he's just about due to want to be paid the biggest cornerback deal on the market in history, and I just don't see why you would want to do that. I'd rather make that investment on our lines, either in the offensive line or in the defensive line, like re-signing a Jadeveon Clowney. So it's good to talk about those type of things with these guys out there. It's great that Snyder's in on these deals, but I'm not as strongly on these as much as I was on the Jadeveon Clowney. I will say one caveat to that is that as these teams continue to make these trades and go along, I think you're going to see the potential for more and more trades in the coming weeks. And the one guy I might just say keep an eye on, it's just a little, I got a little like an itchy gut instinct scratch on this, but Calais Campbell. I believe that he's in the last year of his deal there in Jacksonville. He's a little older player. He's a guy that I know that Schneider has mentioned multiple times as coveting, as looking for a comparable player in the draft that's a lot like that guy. You bring him in, I think that would round out that defensive line rotation quite nice. And Jacksonville might just be willing to make that deal if they see that they're not, looking like they're going to make the playoffs. Certainly if they make a move like moving off of Ramsey at that point, they're certainly in the market to do that. I would rather us target that type of play. Look for a veteran player out there on the market with a little bit of depressed value, might be in the final year of his deal. Even a guy like maybe AJ Green when he comes off of injury. I know we're looking great at wide receiver right now, but if the cost is really low to bring him in as a guy that can give you a red zone threat right out the gate, you don't need him to know a bunch of routes. So I think more outside the box rather than these traditional stuff that we're hearing being the Minkah Fitzpatricks and the Jalen Ramseys. I think something else might be out there lurking, and I wouldn't be opposed to it.
He takes the snap, looks far side, he's going to throw downfield. He's got Metcalf, he's got him, touchdown, Seahawks!
That's the first one. That's the first one. You told me you needed one. I got you. Let's go. I told you I'll get you one. Let's go.
This game's going to be very interesting this week against the Saints. Of course, on paper, it looks like we've got a tremendous advantage. The Saints are licking their wounds, having lost Breeze and their middle linebacker for the year. As well, this is their second straight week having to play out on the West Coast. So not sleeping in your own bed. You have to figure that they're maybe going to be dragging a little bit, maybe not in tip-top shape. That is not to say, though, that I would expect a blowout here. Coach Carroll's coach teams have taught me too much over the years to ever expect a blowout. And as well, I think Teddy Bridgewater is a functional NFL quarterback. He certainly is not great, but he might be one of the better backups in the league. And while he doesn't have a big arm and he's not super accurate deep, he's actually very good in the short to intermediate passing game. And if there's one place the Seahawks tend to be a little bit vulnerable, it's in the short to intermediate passing game. So I would think that he is going to be able to at least somewhat move the ball on the Seahawks in this game. The key will come down to whether or not we can keep them to field goals rather than touchdowns. And if we can get that timely interception or turnover at the right moment, which has been a little bit of a hallmark of the games in the first 2 weeks of the season. And as well, the interesting part of this is going to be, do they continue to stay with this 4-3 base experiment that has Carroll and Norton so titillated. They, in the first week, had their linebackers out, all three of them at the same time, 90% of the time. This last week, it seemed like it dialed back more into that 65 to 70% ratio. I didn't see the snap counts, but it did seem like they had more of a nickel corner out there. And with a guy like Sean Payton as the offensive mind that he is, you have to think that if he sees three wide receivers out there and then he sees three linebackers on the field, he's going to be able to attack that and know how to attack that. Now, maybe Seattle adjusts from a defensive scheme and actually goes with more of their slot corner in this game. But that'll be the interesting matchup that I watch in this game, how they do it. Maybe the Hawk coaches are onto something of a renaissance movement here with this 4-3 defense, and that having that extra linebacker out there is going to be a linchpin to their scheme moving forward. Certainly, teams aren't going to be able to run on us very easily, because if you bring in that third wide receiver and you got three linebackers on the field, normally that third wide receiver would be a tight end or a fullback. And so now you've got essentially one less blocker and you've got one extra linebacker to take care of that run. And the first thing we have seen in the first 2 weeks of the season is teams are not able at all to run the ball on us. So it was a great win this week. It's going to be a fun game to watch moving forward here against the Saints. I got to say, it was so nice to beat the Steelers. I don't know if it's the bitterness I still have in my heart regarding 2005 and seeing the officials steal that Super Bowl away from us to give the Steelers their sixth one in franchise history. But it'll always be a little bit of a, maybe not a hate, but just a little bit of happiness when I get to see the Steelers losing. Maybe you can call it bitterness, call it whatever you may, but I enjoy it nonetheless. So, great team, great victory. It's a great season so far. Go Hawks.